Hello and thanks for joining me. My name is Eric Watson. I'm the Director of Product Management at Medivana. And today I'd like to introduce you to our WebVane console, showing you a demonstration of airline brand sentiment, along with a demonstration of our new metric, a social net promoter score or social NPS metric known as SparkScore. For starters, let's point our browser over to the WebVane console. So I'm going to go to demo.medivana.com and enter my username and password and get logged in. Upon login, you can see that our screen is divided roughly into two parts. On the left-hand side, we have a series of view settings that are going to allow us to manipulate the data in our sentiment database. And on the right, we have sort of a default view window that is set up currently to show what we call our benchmark view, which is the volume of quotes by airline brand. So we have volume on the y-axis and airline brand on the x-axis. And if you look to the far right, you can see a legend of each of these bars and all the different brands. Currently, we've got 33 brands listed here, and so it's quite a busy view. So I'm going to go ahead and sort it a little bit so I can get a better handle on things by clicking the sort button. And I can see here that British Airways is our most popular brand in the sense that we've collected the most quotes about British Airways from the social web. In this case, 4,022 quotes. Now, it's important to note that quotes are slightly different than reviews. Some sentiment analysis vendors will go using review as their atomic unit. At Medivana, we like to use quotes because reviews can be complex. They can have a combination of positive and negative comments in them about a given brand, and so we like to break those down to get to the very specific detailed sentiment, and so that's why we call them quotes as opposed to reviews. And so we are tracking the number of reviews, however, and you can see here that we have 3,814 reviews about British Airways, from which 4,022 quotes have been derived. And if I go down the list, I can see we have American Airlines, Southwest Airlines, etc. And this just shows me the volume of communication about these different brands on the social web. The next logical question might be, where do you get all of this information off the social web? So in order to demonstrate, I'm going to click on our sources button here. You can see sources is one of our fields that we can filter on. I'm going to click the edit button there, and this is going to display a pop-up menu with a checkbox next to all of the different sources that we've collected this data from. Now, these are not all of the sources in totality from the social web, but these are the primary sources that we've identified as being very robust and having a great deal of data that we think is going to be of interest to our users. And you can see here that most of these sites are review-related sites that pertain to the airline industry, as well as Twitter and Facebook, which are not exactly sites, but rather different sources for information from the social web where people are inclined to talk about airline brands in this instance. And if I wanted to, I could filter on some of these sources so that I could look at the differences, say, between Twitter feedback versus some of the feedback on Lonely Planet. So now that we're oriented to our view, we see our sources here. Let's say for purposes of this demonstration that I'm employed with American Airlines and I want to learn a little bit more about what customers think about us on the social web. So I'm going to double click here on American Airlines, and that's going to take me to a drill down view which has all of the sentiment quotes that we've collected about American Airlines. And you can see these are the quotes right here up on the page. We've got 10 quotes per page, and you can see from the bottom that we've got over 100 pages of quotes, so quite a few different quotes about American Airlines. And let's take a look at how they're organized. Since we're just looking at American Airline quotes, you can see that the brand column has just American Airlines. But now we're being introduced to a new column, which is categories. So think of categories as the next level down from brands, right? A brand itself is a type of category, but these categories pertain to airline brands in particular. So if I click on the category button, you can see that we have a pop-up menu with 8 different categories that have been derived from this information. And these categories come to us automatically through Medivana's sentiment analysis engine and classification engine. So when we collect this data from the web, we run it through our classification engine in order to determine what these sentiments are about. In other words, what are people talking about when they say that they like something or they dislike something? Obviously, we know they're talking about airline brands, but in many cases, they get very specific where they talk about food, crew, service, ticketing, etc. So these categories have been automatically derived from our corpus and provided to us by the tool. In addition to categories, some review sites utilize a star rating system of 1 to 5 stars. Now, in the case of these particular quotes, they do not have star ratings associated with them, but in future demonstrations, you'll see that there could be anywhere from 1 to 5 stars depending on the site that the quote is pulled from. And then in this next column, we have polarity. So you see sort of a positive and negative there. +1 means positive polarity or a positive sentiment. Negative means negative sentiment. So here you can see these are all positive quotes. Here's one. I fly that one a lot, and the schedule is perfect as outlined above. So that's obviously somebody has a positive quote. Now if I click on that quote, I can find out more about it, such as where it comes to us from. So in this example, I clicked on the quote. Now I'm taken to the quote details page. And here we see all of the metadata that our engine has collected about the quote. So it's got the quote itself, the source, the sentiments, a link to the quote, the date it was posted. So if I click here, it'll actually take me to the quote itself. And you can see here that this is from a site called Flyer Talk Forums. And there's the quote. I fly that one a lot, and the schedule is perfect, as outlined above. So there we can see. So in this case, if I was working for American Airlines, maybe I want to respond to this quote. I could do that from this site, depending on whether I'm permitted to do that on Flyer Talk or not. If this was a tweet, I could respond to the tweeter. So we can show some other examples of that here as well. Let's pretend that I sent them a reply, and so I can make a little note here for myself in the notes field. Sent customer a thank you note. For their praise. Thanks for telling us we did a good job. So I'll go ahead and save that. That takes me back to my quotes. Going back to the home page then, I can see all the back to the original. I can see all the brands here. Now this sort of default view shows me the volume of sentiment, but what if I want to know more, such as how these different brands compare to one another? What I might want to do is switch to the SparkScore view. And SparkScore is actually something that we developed together in conjunction with one of our partners, Satmetrics Corporation. And Satmetrics is one of the inventors of Net Promoter Score. And so Net Promoter Score, if you're not familiar with it, was originally put together by Fred Reichheld, Bain & Company, and Satmetrics. And it's basically designed to function as both a loyalty metric and a discipline for using customer feedback, because it was discovered that Net Promoter Score is actually something that has a direct correlation to revenue growth. So companies who are successful at increasing the number of promoters they have and decreasing or managing the number of detractors they have are actually demonstrated to be able to grow revenue. So it's a very powerful score that many companies use as sort of the gold standard for demonstrating that they're acting on customer feedback. And what we've done is we've taken that structured Net Promoter Score that comes to us from the realm of structured surveys and applied that same methodology to the unstructured data that we get from the social web. And in many months of hard work and research and development with Satmetrics, we were able to validate those results. And so here we see what the Net Promoter Score or the Spark score of each of these airlines would be based on the corpus of social data that we've collected. So right off the top, we see that Japan Airlines has the highest score of all airlines here with 38.05. Also Virgin America, a close second with 37. And then meanwhile, on the low end, we can see US Airways is scoring quite low at -41. And American Airlines also scoring quite low at -38. So this immediately gives us sort of a view of the playing field, and we can see which airline brands are doing better than others. So if I were American Airlines, maybe I want to find out more about why I'm doing poorly versus the competition. If I double click on my bar graph here again, we will see the different drivers or the different categories. And so again, we see our familiar categories: service, crew, entertainment, etc. Only now we see how they're contributing to the negative perception. So in the case of American Airlines, we see that the service is particularly bad, as is the entertainment. Those are the two that seem to be having a negative impact on us. And meanwhile, food, for example, as well as ticketing, although they are still below average, they're not doing terribly bad. So if I had to prioritize investments on behalf of American Airlines as to where they could apply more resources in order to improve their customer satisfaction, I would say that ticketing and food are probably not the places where they're going to get the most return on investment, but rather entertainment and airline service in this example. So if I go back and look again at SparkScore, I can look for some positive examples where the SparkScore is doing quite well. And here's one that's pretty close to the top, Korean Air, with a SparkScore of 30.22. So if I drill down on Korean Air, let's take a look and see what's driving them. So this is very interesting. We can see ticketing in particular has a very strong influence and positive influence. Overall is very good. Entertainment is good. Crew. However, they've got some areas for improvement, such as seating and price. So it's possible, and then also service and food are sort of right on the median there. So in the case of Korean Air, if we were trying to make some recommendations to Korean, they might take a harder look at their seating policies and their pricing, because apparently the customers that comment about Korean Air feel that they could get a better deal from airlines elsewhere. Also of interest might be the SparkScore by brand, but we might want to look at the trend instead of the benchmark. So for example, let's see which airlines are trending up, which are trending down. Now, because we have a lot of airlines, this is a very busy chart. And so what I think I'm going to do is go ahead and filter out all but a handful of brands so that we can see what's going on here. So let's see, we saw that Virgin America was doing very well earlier, and I believe American Airlines was having a bit of trouble, as was, let's see, US Airways was doing poorly. And another example of a positive airline would be Japan Airlines, if we can find them in here. So let's look at those four and see if we can't get some sense of trend. So here we are, and sure enough, we can see Virgin America in the green, Japan in the blue, and then down here further, American Airlines and US Airways. So we see some interesting patterns here. This takes place over the course of several years, from April 2009 into present. And so most of these airlines have been sort of putting along. It looks like Japan Airlines had a peak back in 2010, and then must have changed something, because they sort of went down into a trough here and then sort of flatlined. So if I were working for Japan Airlines or as an airline analyst, I might want to find out if there's anything interesting that happened here. What's causing that rise, and what caused that decline over time. Virgin America has been a pretty steady eddy, and then up until recently, in September of 2011, it looks like they've begun to undergo a decline, so maybe there were some policy changes there that might have caused that. However, we see that a lot of other airlines experiences declines in the same period. American Airlines, very interestingly, had a steep decline in November, December of last year. And so we noticed that American recently filed for bankruptcy, so that had something to do with that decline, and one might imagine. And so this is a good way to, this trend view is a good way to benchmark against other competitors and see how the SparkScore is trending positively or negatively as compared to your peers or competitors. So these are just some of the views and some of the capabilities of WebVane as they pertain to airline brands. I hope this has given you a good introduction to the tool, and hope to see you again soon for some more demonstrations. Take care.